about the elections, what's at stake, and what we're doing about it. I want to thank you for joining us today. And before we start, I just want to give you a heads up. This is being recorded so that others can have a look as well. I always love having the responsibility of telling people that we're surveilling them. At the ACLU, at least we tell you. Anyway, so it's good to be here with you. And oh, what a year it's been. Myself, I'm both nervous and relieved that the election is finally almost here. And I am super excited for Sing Out for Freedom this Monday, which is not coincidentally election eve. We all need a break from the knots in our stomach and the tension of watching 24-hour news. Thank you all for supporting the concert, for supporting the ACLU and the NYCLU. We love you for helping us and each other get through the last 4 years and for sticking with us through all the twists and turns of 2020. I am so pleased today to be joined by two people who I'm proud to call colleagues and friends, Celia Keenan-Bolger and Dale Ho. Each is a superstar in their field, and I'm thrilled to pieces that they are together now on the NYCLU stage. Celia is a Tony Award-winning actor who's been involved in Sing Out for Freedom practically from the beginning, almost 18 years ago. And she's an incredible activist who uses her voice and her talent generously and powerfully to speak out for social justice. And Dale, well, I probably don't need to introduce you, Dale. Dale has been everywhere lately trying to save voting rights and our democracy from the Trump juggernaut. Dale is the director of the Voting Rights Project at the ACLU. He argued the successful census case in the Supreme Court to stop the Trump regime from adding a citizenship question to the form. This epic case was highlighted in the recent film, The Fight, produced by Kerry Washington. So Dale's also a star of screen. So we have a lot to talk about on voting rights in the election, much more than we could possibly cover in an hour. We're just going to try to cover some of the main threats we've been facing and anticipate after the election and what the ACLU is doing about it. I also want to talk about what individuals are doing to save our democracy, like Celia, who's taking a break today from working the polls to be with us. So Dale, let's start with you. Can you break down for us what are some of the key issues with voting rights at the moment? I know you have a lot to choose from, and what we can expect after the election.
Sure, thanks, Donna, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's difficult to know where to start with that question, Donna. There's so much going on. It is definitely the most challenging year, I think, that I've seen as director of the ACLU Voting Rights Project. It's the toughest year for elections administrators. It's definitely the hardest year for voting rights that this country has seen in decades. I think that's because of two things. One, just increasing controversies around voter suppression, more, I think, stubborn and persistent and unyielding efforts to try to stop people from voting than I've seen in my career. And then layered on top of that, all of the challenges that the pandemic has posed for elections administration. Even if you didn't have all of the voter suppression that's happening around the country, the pandemic by itself would make this election, I think, the hardest one for this country to administer since 1864 was conducted during the Civil War. It's that difficult. During the primaries, we saw canceled elections, delayed elections, long lines due to poll worker shortages and closed polling places, waiting times to vote of 3 hours in Milwaukee, 5 hours in Atlanta, 7 hours in Las Vegas, almost invariably hitting voters of color the hardest. And looking at that, we at the ACLU and affiliates nationwide have been doing everything that we can to try to make sure that everyone can vote safely, that people don't have to choose between their right to vote and their health. And that and to try to make sure that we make the lives of elections administrators easier by flattening the curve when it comes to the surge of ballots, trying to get as many voters processed before election day as possible so that we don't have to shove millions and millions of voters through fewer polling places than we had in 2016, all during the worst public health crisis that this country has experienced in a century. The ACLU's filed over 30 cases around the country to try to make voting easier and safer this year. I'm pleased to report that we won 26 victories so far this year, things ranging from convincing 5 states through our lawsuits to allow every eligible voter to vote by mail if they so choose, eliminating witness signature requirements for absentee voting, something that stops thousands of ballots in every election from being counted, but in Wisconsin, in their primary this year, was the #1 reason why absentee ballots were tossed, because I think right now during the pandemic, a witness signature requirement is something that's always problematic, but right now poses particular problems to actually have to find someone to watch you fill out your absentee ballot, witness you complete it, and then sign your absentee ballot envelope, which about 12 states require, forces people to break the very social distancing protocols that we're being asked to observe to keep ourselves and our communities safe. We've brought cases to protect the right of people to have assistance with the conveyance of their absentee ballots due to postal service issues, defending the use of drop boxes in Pennsylvania, challenging the absentee return deadline in Michigan, also because of postal service delays. And we investigated 5 states for failing to provide voter registration services when people apply for public assistance, which is a requirement under federal law. With the job losses and economic problems we're seeing from the pandemic, more and more people than ever are turning to public assistance programs, and millions of voters were not provided with a voter registration opportunity while applying. As a result of our investigations, 3 million voters in 5 states who are on public assistance received voter registration applications. And then on top of that, separate from the election, the Trump administration has waged a new attack on the census, announcing this summer that they intend to exclude undocumented immigrants altogether from the census count used to divvy up representation in Congress. We won that here in the lower court, in a federal court in Manhattan. But the case is going to be heard in the Supreme Court on November 30th, the Monday after Thanksgiving. The ACLU has been involved in a wide range of work this year. Heading into the election, there's still so much more to worry about. We're looking at issues like voter intimidation, like long lines again, like we saw in the primaries. The Trump campaign is waging attacks on efforts by states to try to make it easier and safer for people to vote. They've sued to try to stop absentee ballot extensions of deadlines in Pennsylvania and North Carolina in cases that the Supreme Court considered just last night. And the president is undermining confidence in in the integrity of elections themselves by calling for, among other things, the halting of counting ballots on election night, something that has actually never happened in decades since people started casting some ballots by mail. And we're concerned about and have built contingency plans in place to try to stop any efforts to interfere with the full canvass of ballots. So that's just kind of an overview. I know I just went through a lot right there, but it's been a kind of crazy year for voting rights, and we expect a crazy 5 days running up to Election Day, and potentially some challenges in the days ahead.
Ooh, Dale, I can say, I think on behalf of all of us, I'm so grateful for all of the work that you're doing. I wonder if we can bring it, like zoom in to New York, and just talk about a little bit of New York's history with voting. I feel like we used to be one of the worst in terms of voter turnout because it was so hard to vote in New York State. And I'm just interested, either Donna or Dale, if you can talk about what the NYCLU has been doing to help New Yorkers cast their ballot fairly and freely.
Yeah, so I mean, New York was the bottom of the barrel in terms of access to the ballot for a long time. And just since the by-elections, has made incredible progress in implementing reforms, and like early voting, which we just got, one might say in the nick of time for this election. It started in the primary, automatic voter registration, pushing back the deadline for registration, but not pushing it back far enough. The deadline was October 25th. We have a lawsuit that's now in the federal appeals court that, challenging that deadline. I don't think we'll get a resolution of that lawsuit before the election, which speaks volumes. And we have gotten on our way to a constitutional amendment that is necessary for no excuse absentee voting. That, of course, has been dealt with in terms of the pandemic, because the governor passed an executive order, and there was legislation to support it, that you don't need an excuse. COVID is enough of an excuse or reason to get an absentee ballot. So no excuse absentee balloting is happening, but it's going to be on the ballot for New Yorkers to ratify after the next legislative session. So I feel good about the progress, but people who have been waiting in New York, which last I heard was not a swing state, for 4 hours to vote, to cast their vote as part of early voting. Which is good news. I mean, it's good news and bad news. The system has to, be improved big time. But so Celia, could you tell us like what you've been doing? Like, how is it being a poll watcher, and what else are you doing? Yeah.
I mean, I think what you just said about the lines of early voting, I have found so inspiring and also infuriating. And as I was sort of looking around to see what I could do to help, what they kept saying was, vote, make sure you have a plan to vote, make sure you have a plan for your friends and your family and encourage them to vote. Call people who you don't know or text them. I know the NYCLU campaign has amazing phone banking and text banking. And I've been participating in all of those. And then I also, in addition to that, decided to do poll worker training this year so that, whenever I go to vote every year, usually the people that are helping at the polls are over 60. And I thought, well, that's a way that I could participate and learn a little bit more about our democracy and help out with this election. So I've been assigned for election day, but I haven't had to work the polls yet. So I can't wait to report back on what that experience is like. I also have just really been thinking about what it means to be an artist right now. And I think something that I maybe took for granted before, or that I'm not sure I fully realized about the impact of an artist is two things. One, that we're able to to spread a message through our work, through visual art, through song, that there is a message that can be delivered that's different than just listening to people talk in a Zoom meeting, but also in building resilience and taking care of each other emotionally, which is something that I'm so excited about Sing Out for Freedom, that I feel like we can actually inspire and lift the mood and the emotions of people, which I think before I always thought was sort of like, what does that really matter? And I'm realizing is actually fundamental to the resistance. And so I've been trying to just put myself in spaces where I can both inspire and try to emotionally take care of our community, which sort of makes me think about the fight, Dale. And I'm just curious, as somebody from the outside, what your perspective on, I feel like I know so many people, particularly in the Broadway community, who are interested in how they can get involved and what it means to get involved. And so I'm just wondering what your sense of the role of arts and media in protecting civil liberties and civil rights, like what does that look like to you?
Well, so for folks who don't know, there was this documentary made, maybe most people here do, a documentary made about the ACLU and 4 cases that we had over the last 3 years against the Trump administration, including the family separation case and the census questionnaire case that I argued in the Supreme Court last year. And one of the things I was thinking about when the film was being made, and we were, I think, being cast in the role of the defenders and saviors of democracy and civil rights, was that we really, lawyers can't actually fill those shoes. The best thing that we can do is play defense for as long as we can, try to stop as many of these awful Trump policies from being fully implemented for as long as we can. But at the end of the day, we weren't going to be able to hold them off forever. And what instead we needed in this country was a broader cultural shift and more and greater and deeper levels of civic engagement and pushback. And I think that is where the arts come in, right? Because, at the end of the day, as effective and as important as I think the work of NYCLU and the ACLU and ACLU affiliates all is, we just can't, at the end of the day, stop the awesome power of the federal government under this terrible regime from doing all of the terrible things that they're trying to do. Well, the only thing that can is a groundswell of people. And, I don't think that's something that lawyers can catalyze, but that the arts can.
It makes me think about how we look to arts and culture, just that I think as a society, we look to the arts to both hold up a mirror, but also how to live our lives better. And so I think when artists show up in a way that gives direction, it does actually transform the culture in a way. And that's something that maybe feels, certainly more relevant than it ever has in my life. It kind of reminds me of the Broadway Stands Up for Freedom, now Sing Out for Freedom. In 2017, we did a concert of all new music where we asked composers from the musical theater and in New York to write songs as a sort of response to the Trump presidency. And my friend and amazing artist activist Michael Friedman had been traveling all over the country and interviewing Trump supporters, essentially. And he wrote some pieces about their experience and their feelings of marginalization. And it was such a it shone a light. I feel like I had listened to so many interviews and had seen, I had heard a lot of people talk about, from different parts of the country, what it feels like to not necessarily see oneself represented in the media. And then to have it turned into music, to have a specific voice, it completely changed the way that I heard those stories. And again, I think that is a way that the arts are really affecting and important to what we do. And I think, particularly this year, it feels so unfair that we're not able to gather, that like the thing that we need most right now is community and this feeling of not doing this alone, that we're actually all together. And I have felt like these virtual events, these concerts, and then, like looking at Twitter and everybody sort of weighing in, and that it's like if we can't sit in a theater and watch artists give us their gifts, the second best thing we can do is sit in front of a computer and do it. And I think it just makes me really excited for the second and for this concert.
Yeah, Celia, what you said just resonates so much with me. Every year, I feel rejuvenated by the concert. It is a ton of work, as you know, but it's really worth every minute that and every ounce of energy that we put into it. Just seeing how, talent, the most incredibly talented folks come together to use their talents to promote civil liberties, and how the two communities come together and support each other. The synergy is something that I think helps us keep going all year long. And I have to say that we've been doing this concert for 18 years, and every year I am just blown away by the talent, the humbleness, the humility of like incredibly talented people, and the generosity of the Broadway community. And this year, when Broadway is so vulnerable, is so wounded, folks are standing up and really trying to support each other and the world, by not being silenced. And so it's really powerful to me. Yeah, we're going to miss, being backstage together, being on stage together. I'm going to miss like having to do things that are so out of my comfort zone in front of a zillion people. And we're going to miss being, you remember last year, yeah. So, and being in the audience. But I'm hoping that in the virtual space, we can reach even more people. I know other ACLU affiliates have invited their members to join us. And so there'll be a lot of folks who've been before, and a whole lot of folks who would never have been able to come to the show in person. And that sort of brings me to the whole notion of, silver linings. And one thing I just wanted to add about there are a couple of silver linings of the pandemic and the situation that we're in, which is, we're talking about voter suppression. And the key to change is sometimes using our litigation talents and strategies, and sometimes it's advocacy. But you can't really win lasting change when people don't get it. And one thing we can say about voter suppression is that all those things, all those tricks that they use to steal power from the people, now people get it. Whether it's not having enough polling places, whether it's witnesses for the absentee ballots, whether it's a poll tax, like in Florida, there's, and so, hey, I found a silver lining, and I just wanted to share that as we move forward. So, you know, this has been flying by. And I think we have time for a couple of questions. Do we have questions? I don't see questions. Oh, here we are. So
I also just want to add
Celia, yeah.
something, Donna.
Yeah.
Just that you said that I think is so, that has always been true. I mean, I'm speaking of the Broadway community, but I think this is true about the artistic community, particularly in New York as a whole, that the willingness to donate time and to make themselves available, I have been so over and over and over moved by, and that I feel like any organization that has, and I think the NYCLU has done an amazing job at this, but I think artists, I can speak for myself as an actor, like I'm just used to being like, okay, like show up at rehearsal and so just tell me what to do. And I think that that attitude is sort of everywhere in our community, and that the artistic community is hungry for purpose right now and hungry for directives and ways that they can show up. And so I would just say to anybody on this call, or to if you have branches of your organizations, to say, like, if you need something, you can I think I know so many artists who are looking to become involved. They just want to know what to do. And I think that's been one of the ways. I don't even know that I think of myself as an activist. I just feel like I'm a bridge between a community and a community, that I have access to the NYCLU. And so I just send that message back to my people, and then they show up. And that I think that's been one of the ways that I think artists, again, can become involved and can not only be a bridge to organizations, but a bridge to their friends and to their family, in sharing resources, in having hard conversations. I think actors are particularly equipped to tell stories, which often, as I've been phone banking, I have found myself, when they're like, well, why are you, they want to know why I'm phone banking or why I am supporting the candidate that I'm supporting. It's easy for me to talk about my personal experience, to tell a story. And I think that that's ultimately, what artists are trained to do. And so we do, I think, have a specific tool set that is different from just, the lady that calls me and she's like, good afternoon, my name is Shirley and I'm calling on behalf, and you're like, oh boy, here we go. But that, I think, we have a special gift of communication. And so in these times, we're facing 100% unemployment in Actors Equity, it means that we can use our resources to try to sway this election and to fight not only for our community, but for communities who are even less represented than we are.
Thank you so much for that, Celia, really. I have to just remember with everyone in 2008, when you kind of sheepishly said, so I'm going to sing this song. Don't worry, I'm going to introduce it in a way that's nonpartisan. And it was like a love song to a Barack Obama. And I don't know if you remember that, but artists are always pushing the envelope, and you sure do, and you sure have, and you sure did, and I love it. And it was great. Maddie wrote that, right? Yeah. So Dale, do you want to share some additional thoughts?
I just want to say two things. I know I painted a pretty bleak picture. It has been a tough year and things have been challenging, but I will tell you, I am very, very, very encouraged by what I'm seeing. Celia talked about being sort of really, inspired by the number of people who are turning out to vote, maddened by, it's maddening, the lines and the hoops that people have to jump through to have their voices heard. But, over 70 million people have cast ballots already in this election, right? The election isn't 5 days from now, it's now, right? And at this time, 5 days out, 4 years ago, only about 36 million people had voted. So we already have twice as many people who've cast their ballots this year than 4 years ago. New York, thanks to the reforms that Donna and Nyclu were working so hard to make sure happened this year, over 1 million votes cast and received and processed in New York. As of today, as of this morning, 4 years ago, when we didn't have any of these reforms, we were at fewer than 10,000 votes processed 5 days out from the election. So just the groundswell of people who are just, willing to. I see people sometimes saying things like, "I will crawl over broken glass to have my votes counted, my vote counted this year," and that really does inspire me. The second thing I'd say is, even though we are preparing for possible, what we call them nightmare scenarios around the office, situations like there being 40 to 50% of the absentee ballots uncounted yet on election night in some of the pivotal states from 2016, like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan, because those states don't, for insane reasons, do not permit absentee ballots to be processed on a rolling basis, but require them to be processed either starting the day before the election, in Michigan's case, election morning in Wisconsin's case, or actually after polls close in Pennsylvania's case. And with record numbers of people voting by mail, it means we might not see, those states may not have 50 or even percent or even more of their ballots processed on election night when results are being reported. And we're all worried about a situation where the president, who's been sowing confusion and trying to undermine the public's confidence in those absentee votes, if he's winning on the in-person tally in those states on election night, just goes on TV and says, "I won, it's over," and then maybe his campaign sues to try to stop that. These are the kinds of things that 2 or 3 months ago I would have regarded as outlandish. But this year, 2020, seems to be the year where, like, every 2 or 3 weeks, something that you used to think was outlandish happens. So we've prepared for that scenario. If there's any attempt to try to interfere with the full canvas of absentee or provisional ballots after polls close, the ACLU and its affiliates will be ready to jump into court and defend the rights of voters, because the election's not over until every vote's counted. Every vote counts. Now, I don't regard these scenarios as likely to happen. We've kind of, drafted these plans and put them behind the glass that says break in case of emergency, and we hope that glass remains intact. But just rest assured that if what we thought was unthinkable happens, we're ready to go.
Would both of you be willing to talk? I feel like so much like we're trying to sprint to the end, like to get to November 3rd. And of course, what I think we understand is that we need to be in this for the long haul and understand that, first December 13th and then January 20th are these sort of milestones. And inside of those, like the state ratification and then federal ratification, what can we as citizens do if we feel like, how can we hold systems accountable so that we don't end up feeling, I think there's a sense that I have sometimes that all of a sudden, it feels like that with this most recent Supreme Court appointment, that it's just like, this is not just, this is not fair. Oh, that just happened. And what do we do about it? And to think in terms of the election, that I think I don't want to end up in a situation where we're like, we won, but somehow that wasn't what was determined, and just where citizens can, how we can participate or how we can support the work of the ACLU and the NYCLU.
So, that's a huge and hugely important question. And, when we talk in the office or on Zoom about, sort of like what happens if he, tries to steal the election. He's already been trying, but, we call those the cooey scenarios. It took me like 5 different iterations of COUPY to realize that COUPY is spelled COUPY. Anyway, but I think that you know, sort of like all the run up to the election stuff that folks are doing is really important. You know, the positive side of 4-hour waits is that people care enough, the energy is there, people get it. This is like the election of a lifetime. But you know, we're also planning for post-election. You know, Dale can talk about litigation stuff and has, you know, for COUPY scenarios. I don't know if you've been using that in the national office, but now you have a new word. But we're talking, you know, in every one of the affiliates of the ACLU about people, you know, people needing to and likely to, whatever happens in the election, get out on the streets to demonstrate, you know, right after the election. You know, there are two separate, you know, streams of protests being organized here in New York and around the country. I think two is probably an understatement, but people are planning on getting out, you know, the day after the election, quite likely. And there's another possibility a little bit later on. Protect the returns is the hashtag for that. And you know, it reminds me a little bit of when I was, you know, back in the 70s, when we organized a demonstration after the verdict in the Chicago 7 case, actually, which is the subject of that new documentary. You know, we were going to go out the day after the verdict. We were going to have a demonstration. We didn't know when it was going to be because it was the day after. And sort of like these demonstrations are a little bit like that. But so people need to pay attention, but we'll all be watching and going out, you know, and the one particular lane that the NYCLU is involved in with that, in that regard, is we've trained hundreds of protest monitors to go out as legal observers to document what's going on. You know, we have a problem in New York City and around the state with the police and their response, their reaction to protest. And we just filed a lawsuit, you know, on behalf of 11 people who were hurt by the police during the Black Lives Matter protests in May and June. And we just wrote a letter to the city, to the mayor, the apologist in chief, and the police commissioner, the co-apologist in chief for the police, you know, demanding a number of reforms in policing and urging them not to let the NYPD be deployed as Trump's army, right, to suppress dissent and protest after the election. So there's a lot that we're doing. You know, I can't spell out all the details, but you know, it's like a, you know, follow us on social media and follow, you know, Protect the Results on social media, and you'll find out what's going on. Dale, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing that everyone, and I think folks on this Zoom probably understand this already, is that it's possible that election night's going to be different from every presidential election in our history. Well, I guess 2000 was the closest analog, but that we may not be able to project the winner right away. And that may actually be true in multiple states, right? Because of the absentee vote, which takes longer to process, and because of the states that were decisive in 2016, which don't permit for the processing of absentee votes until either election day or afterwards. We just might not know. Now it's possible that we might. So I don't want to go around telling everyone. I feel like sometimes the message goes too far in one direction and people are saying, you know, we're not going to know who won on election night. It's possible that we will, if it's not close, if those 3 states in the upper Midwest aren't decisive the way they were in 2016, you know, there might be a blowout. And if those states aren't decisive, then, you know, we may know, but we might not. And if we don't know, it's not because of something going wrong. It's not because elections officials screwed up. It's not because there's fraud, right? It's because they're taking the time that they have to take to make sure that every vote is counted. And that's how it's supposed to work. We've gotten used to the instant gratification of breaking news graphics as soon as polls close and projected winners just might not happen this year, but that's okay. It's much more important to get the count right than to get it fast. I think people are understanding that. The last public opinion poll I saw on this was that 65% of the public does not expect to know who won on election night. Wow. That's good, because if people have that expectation that it might take longer this year, then that's not going to cause the loss in confidence of our election integrity, our election's integrity that Trump is hoping to cause, that he's hoping to use as an opening for malfeasance afterwards. So that's, I think, the number one thing. Everyone's got to understand this election might be different, and we have to get that word out, right? If we do get into one of these kinds of contested scenarios with Trump trying to steal the election, as Donna put it, we'll do what we can in court, but it's going to be up to people to make their voices heard, I think, in the street, right? And that's not the ACLU. We don't, do a lot of organizing mass, demonstrations. There are a lot of other organizations that do that, but we do protect people's right to protest and have their voices heard. So you can bet your bottom dollar that if people go out into the street, the ACLU will be there to defend their right to speak, be heard. And at the end of the day, I think that's what's going to be critical to making sure that our institutions do abide by the rule of law and honor the results of the election.
So we
That's
had
so
one
helpful.
Yeah. We have one quick question. I wonder if you could answer it fast, Dale. Why aren't the federal primary and general election days national holidays? I've been a certified election inspector since the hanging chance. I work full-time and luckily can take paid time off to serve at the elections. Why aren't election days federal holidays?
Well, they ought to be, right? I think probably all of us on this call agree with that. But what I will say is that even that, I think, is not sufficient, because there are a lot of people who don't get federal holidays off, in particular service workers, people in low income or hourly wage jobs frequently don't get those days off anyway. So I think what's equally important is having lots of options for voters, right? Lots of days on which people can vote, not just election day, but early in-person voting, and letting everyone who wants to vote by mail cast their ballot by mail if they so choose. Now, we're at this point right now, and I think people understand this, that given Postal Service issues and Postal Service delays, if anyone, was planning on voting by mail, they ought to be returning that ballot in person at this point, yeah. Right? There are some states that permit ballots to be counted as long as they're postmarked by election day and received within a few days afterwards. Even in those states, I would recommend to your friends and family, if they were planning on voting by mail and they haven't yet returned their ballot, drop it off in person if you can, or at a drop box if you can, or if switching to in-person voting is now an option in your state after you've already requested an absentee ballot, you might want to consider that instead.
Thanks, Dale, and thanks for that question, Ellen Kearns. Well, we are at the end of our time, and it flew by. Thank you so much, Celia and Dale. That was really wonderful. And thanks everybody who joined us today. Thanks to our sponsors, host committee members, producer circle members for your support. And everybody, I hope you've got a plan. If you're a wait till the last minute kind of guy like I am, get the plan. It's the last minute. Get a plan, vote, and remember, join us on November 2nd at 6:30 p.m. wherever you are. And you can go to singoutforfreedom.com, and please spread the word. You all got an email about this. Send it to everybody in your address book. This is going to be a fun night. It'll be a distraction that we all need, and go vote. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.